Welcome to this EDUcast, Best Practices Modern LAN, brought to you by NVT FiBridge and Telecom Reseller. Today we have John Croce, CEO of NVT FiBridge, and I'm Gary Auden. And as we always do, we talk about our agenda. We're going to talk about what the traditional concerns are with moving to a full IP LAN environment. We're going to discuss a number of modern LAN principles, in fact 6 of them. How do you modernize to a full IP LAN and reduce your infrastructure issues, but also maximize your security? And how you control and accelerate modernization to the modern LAN. On this slide, you're contrasting the old digital LAN architecture with an IP-based LAN. Why move to an IP-based LAN?
The industry is forcing the move, first of all, because many of the existing providers are end-of-lifing their solutions. An IP-based solution, given all the great integrated applications, provide a lot of ways for users to communicate, work more efficiently, whether it's from home or office or while they're traveling, ultimately with the objective of increasing the bottom line as it relates to efficiency, but also figuring out how to ensure voice quality of service. I think there's that's one area that there tends to be concern. So when you look at this diagram here, what's key to understand is the reason why the old digital had such great reliability, and we talked about the 5 nines reliability, had a lot to do with the point-to-point design, meaning from the endpoint all the way back to where the application reside was a dedicated physical wiring that supported the connectivity and delivered the voice application. And a lot to do with that point-to-point topology. So there are many benefits to moving to IP, but the concern is, one of the areas of concern is how do I get there?
Let's move to the next slide, and you have the word traditional barriers here. All right, what do you mean by traditional barriers to IP?
The methodology of getting the local area network is applying a PC-centric approach to network design, where the PoE switches to support the endpoint were predominantly based on data terminals, meaning high bandwidth requirements, bursting nature of the bandwidth requirement. And as a result of that paradigm, in moving the IP voice device or the voice device to IP or an IP phone, customers typically would work from the paradigm, and so would the industry work from the paradigm of a traditional network upgrade, which means, okay, we need to rip and replace all the infrastructure. The point-to-point voice infrastructure could not support the IP phone, so we have to put new cabling. We got to address all the IDF closet requirements, because now network switches have 100-meter limitation or 365 feet limitation. So you have all these IDF closets. You got to deal with disruption and scheduling. Of course, for IT staff, it's demands on my team to now manage IP voice as well as all the other applications. And then network pressure in the sense of, can I design a network that's not only going to support my core business, but also support all these other IP applications like voice without compromising the experience? When you look at from a customer's perspective, everyone that we spoke to and a lot of our partners, is they always bring in some of the concerns. And the concerns as a result of this requirement is physical barriers, project complexity, costs and risks, the time requirements to get the infrastructure ready, technical support requirements. Quality of service is a big concern. Network security, we're hearing more and more about these security breaches. And then ultimately, justifying an ROI as a result of this move to IP telephony.
Frost and Sullivan produced a set of principles for the modern LAN. Would you tell us about the paper they produced?
Frost and Sullivan did some research on companies' challenges in modernizing to IP. And based on the research, they identified some customers that took a different approach to modernizing and addressing the challenges we just spoke of. And what they came up with were these principles of modernization that is a different paradigm or a different approach to building out your local area network to support not only data devices, but this new world of the Internet of Things and all these additional endpoints. So there's 6 principles, which is a new best practice to designing a highly secure LAN, which in essence overcomes some of the traditional barriers to IP and the Internet of Things, again with the objective of supporting more than just data terminals.
Okay, let's start off with principle number 1. How do you design an approach for the modern LAN?
The traditional approach would be, is it a gigabit switch that we're looking to put in place? Whereas principle number 1 is not to look at from the switch capabilities out, but to start from an outside-in approach, and that is, what endpoint are we looking to deploy? What are the characteristics of that endpoint? What's the bandwidth requirements? What's the power requirements? What is the characteristic of bandwidth? Well, what we know about voice, it's not the amount of bandwidth that's important, but the continual availability of bandwidth, so that packets travel in order on time without contention or loss. That provides quality of service. So by taking an outward-in approach, you're really looking at designing the LAN to support the best experience for that endpoint. Then once you do that, you also have to consider what's the impact on my business. And there are many, many situations we're hearing where cybersecurity breaches are happening because people get access to the network through, for example, a thermostat on a fish tank, where that requirement had nothing to do with the core business, but because of the LAN design, it allowed access to the core business.
I see with principle number 2, you talk about LAN management and robust and secure networks. Would you provide some more insights, please?
Well, one of the biggest things that we hear from customers is complexity of networks and challenges around skill sets of their people to support those network requirements. So again, looking at your network design and saying, how can I simplify the network design, yet create a robust strategy, which this comes into play is, can I design specific paths or strategies for specific endpoints? And I always look at not just the deployment of the solution, but look at its long-term management requirements of that solution once implemented as well. But in addition, make sure that you provide flexibility, meaning flexibility as to where the information a given application converges. Does it converge at the edge where the computer and an IP camera and a phone all share the same switch fabric? Or does it converge centrally where you create different paths for each application? Or do you have it completely separate? Or do you converge in the cloud? But thinking of your LAN design in a manner which gives you the most flexibility.
Continuing with that comments about the robust and secure, would you take the traditional LAN and modern LAN and compare them?
If you look at the traditional LAN and what we described the diagram above, and the diagram below shows the application of modern LAN principles, where if I could take the existing infrastructure and PoE enable that voice infrastructure and connect my IP endpoint and connect the application through a given capability. The challenge, of course, is the limitations of standard PoE switches do not have those capabilities. Therefore, it wasn't possible. Yet, again, now one of the new principles coming that we'll speak of is consider innovations. And what you see in this diagram is one such innovation.
Now we'll move on to principle number 3. You discuss efficiencies and technological advances. What do you mean by those?
What I mean by those is exactly what you saw in the diagram, and that is always consider advancements in PoE capabilities and LAN strategies. You know, we've seen incredible advancements in technologies, but when it comes to PoE switch capabilities, the one thing that hasn't changed in over 20 years is the reach limitations and cable requirements. As a result of the innovations in which is being introduced, by introducing innovation to your network strategy, you can create a much better business outcome and a much more secure network at a lower cost.
In the next slide, Principle 4, you bring up the term environmental responsible framework. That's not a term I normally hear with LANs. Would you expand on that?
What we mean by that is, again, there's a significant environmental impact as customers look to modernize to IP. What many fail to recognize is in the transition to IP, is there an opportunity for us to be environmentally responsible? So instead of having to rip and replace infrastructure, can we repurpose that infrastructure and make it new again in the sense of capability? Also, to the extent we deploy endpoints and new switches, are those endpoints and switches power efficient? And what could I do to ensure that I'm being responsible in my modernization?
Let's continue with that word responsibility. Many people who are watching this EDUcast are starting with an existing LAN. Would you talk about responsible transformation to IP?
This diagram shows the polar switch supporting the new IP endpoints. So what you see is the ability to, because of the switch's capabilities, the ability to repurpose that existing voice infrastructure and in essence connect the new IP phone. So instead of all the rip and replace, you can in 3 easy steps get a complete end-to-end IP solution that is easy to manage and easy to deploy, yet delivers the quality of service that you need. So it's, are you able to repurpose the infrastructure you have versus having to rip and replace that infrastructure?
Now moving on to principle number 5, and we've followed a number of good design practices and procedures. Would you discuss what physically separate but functionally integrated IP networks means, when, and what is the value?
What we're hearing now about more than we ever heard before is the amount of data breaches companies are facing. And a lot of that has to do with poor network designs and poor network management policies. So to the extent you can create a LAN where, given these innovations that exist, given the existing infrastructure, which is point-to-point and separate from your core business, that you're able to create separately physical paths for those applications. So to give you an example, IP phones. Now with a polar switch, you can create a completely separate IP backbone for your phones. For your cameras, you can take your coax and create a completely separate IP backbone for your cameras. So you can keep those functions completely separate if you wish. However, if you want to integrate those functions and those applications with other parts of your business, a single wire between that functional application and network connects back into your core network. That single wire, of course, and the IT team can manage policies around access and create firewalls. Now, and the beauty is you can go from completely separate to totally converged centrally to back to being separate. So that's what this principle means, is make sure you can create physically separate, functionally integrated if you choose to, yet always considering the mission critical platforms that you don't want to be impacted as you introduce new IoT endpoints.
This slide demonstrates there's almost anything that could be connected to a LAN. Why are all these connections making LAN architecture and design even more complex?
It looks more complex, but it's actually a lot more simple. And what I mean by that is creating these different paths for supporting applications. For example, speakers. access control, cameras, intercom, IPTV. These are applications that are not necessarily core to the business outcome for a given organization. However, are moving to IP because of the efficiency and the value add that you get from those applications. But by creating different paths, centrally converging or converging in the cloud, you can create a design that is truly simple and allow for the core business not to be compromised, given all these new endpoints being introduced to the network.
And the next slide brings up the term return on investment. How does LAN design deliver the ROI?
One of the principles is the ultimate outcome. We cannot get distracted with our considerations around these new cool applications and deal with what it will take to get the applications in place. Principle 6 is a reminder, is ultimately businesses are considering the modernization to an IoT-based solution because they want to create a better business outcome. And the question is how do I ensure, given a level of budget, that I create that outcome?
Let's talk about that. As with any IT organization, they always have a limited budget. In fact, many times they're asked to keep reducing their budget. Would you compare the traditional LAN versus the modern LAN expenditures for us?
Ultimately, in a modernization to a new IP-based application, there's 3 buckets that we look at. There's the infrastructure, there's the devices, and there's the application. And of course, the first step in that endeavor is infrastructure. And unfortunately, many customers, and there was a study done by Numeritas several years ago where they identified over 60% of end users underestimated how much it was going to cost to put the infrastructure in place to support their IP modernization, because of the many unknowns associated with rip and replace. You got the equipment, you got cable, you got labor associated with getting that infrastructure in place, which then means you have less available to IP devices and applications. Whereas modern LAN and ensuring your ROI is, are you applying policies and strategies and innovation that allows you to change the equation, where you're building the right infrastructure, but the infrastructure as a percentage of the total cost of the project is a lower percentage, which then leaves more of your budget to applications and applications adoptions, which ultimately allow you to drive a better ROI.
Most of our viewers have not heard of your product line called Chariot. What encompasses the Chariot set of products?
The Chariot series of switches is very different than your traditional switches. Traditional switches have limitations as to reach capabilities, as we discussed earlier, of 365 feet or 100 meters. As well as have cable type requirements where they're multi-pair UTP cabling, Cat5, Cat6, better, that type of cabling. These switches are enterprise grade switches. We have unmanaged, single port, and managed solutions for each of these families. The Polar family delivers Ethernet and PoE over a single pair of wire. The Clear switch delivers Ethernet and PoE over coax to 4,000 feet. And the Flex is a high power PoE where we're getting 50 watts of power over multi-pair UTP to 2,000 feet.
As you mentioned earlier, there are definite cable limitations in distance with traditional LANs. How does power over long reach Ethernet actually work?
Well, we have what we call Smart Path PoE technology embedded in our solutions. And it's, in this one example here, this is a switch that delivers Ethernet and PoE up to 15 watts of power over 1,200 feet. So in essence, you would connect the infrastructure to the switch and connect an adapter at the IP endpoint, which is the size of a USB key, which has RJ11 on one side and then RJ45 on the other, which you then would connect your endpoint to it. And it's truly that simple.
Now moving on to Flex, which you mentioned earlier. How does this product work and where does it fit? What's its application?
Well, the flex switch, it's flex because it's flexible in that it allows you to connect endpoints that are within standard Ethernet reach over either 2 or 4 pair of cable directly to the switch. But to the extent you also have endpoints that require further reach, then you would use the flex extender adapters, and those adapters allow you to go up to 2,000 feet or 6 times further than standard switches over multi-pair UTP. We also have an adapter where it converts one long run into supporting 4 different endpoints with the Flex 4. Where we're seeing the application of this is, again, in physical security, where they have UTP infrastructure supporting cameras, but the reach of those go beyond standard reach. We're also seeing it used in large environments, like the Kansai Airport is one example, where they deployed sensors in their airport terminal, and they were able to use the flex switch to connect those sensors in the location requirements, and they reduced the number of IDF closets from over 10 down to 2.
It is common for most people to think of Ethernet as a twisted pair copper wire connection, but in our conversations earlier we talked about coaxial cable connections, especially for video systems. How does Clear satisfy the coax cable requirements?
You simply take the existing infrastructure, connect it to those downlink ports, and then the uplink ports get connected to the application as any other standard PoE switch. You're able to deliver 100 meg symmetrical over coax to 2,000 feet and 10 meg symmetrical to 4,000 feet over a coax infrastructure. So this is being used heavily for cameras, IPTV, and a lot in the smart city environments where they're in rail stations and different stations where they need to have IP-based connections at greater distances.
Now, all of this is a really great idea. Would you summarize some of the benefits, though, for the customer by adopting your Chariot products?
The obvious benefit is reduced infrastructure costs, ultimately driving the ROI. It's the ability to take infrastructure, make it much easier to build a robust platform and reduce the costs associated with cabling, IDF closets. Again, better PoE port utilization because all the endpoints consolidate into a single location. It also allows the customer to fast track the transformation and implementation of the new application. You know, you have no business or network disruption. So the ability to leverage the existing infrastructure and not having to rip and replace the infrastructure, the ability to simplify network management, because for IT teams, you're not having to deal with ensuring the network can support the new application, whatever that might be. Eliminate risk for customers. You rarely hear simple, cost-effective, easy, secure. So customers tend to hear our message and go, okay, that's not true. But what we can do with our solution is allow for a real-world proof of concept. Because you're leveraging an existing infrastructure, you can easily try it in the environment. Allow application teams as well as the reseller who's offering the solution end-to-end control with no dependency on a network in which you may not have authority over, and develop a highly secure network as well by separating the different applications. And ultimately being robust and simple, easy to configure, plan, install, easy to troubleshoot and manage, and of course the solution being IoT certified.
The title on this slide is Major Milestone. This is a big number you have at the bottom. What does it mean?
When we introduced these innovations, what motivated us, because we knew that we were disturbing the thought process around network design, and we knew we were going up against some really heavy players. But what gave us the confidence to continue down this track was that we knew when customers adopt our technology that the outcomes were going to be incredible for them. And the biggest area was financial savings. And we just recently hit this milestone where we helped customers in essence save in excess of $100 million in infrastructure spend, allowing them to actually go and reallocate that savings to applications and application adoptions. So as a result, we're offering all customers and partners the ability to do a proof of concept and test our technology. We have additional discounts that we are making available for those who register the projects of up to 20%, and we also have extended warranty offerings that we're making available.
I'd like to point out there are a number of resources here. We talked about the Modern LAN white papers available, a podcast that John has recorded with Telecom Reseller, and then there's some more insights from industry experts and more about Modern LAN enabling technology at NVT FiBridge. As we always like to do, we point out the contact information for the company, the email address, the website, and how to get a hold of the local sales representative that can help you out. Thank you very much, John. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for inviting me, and it's been a pleasure.